Morning, everybody. My name is Joydeep Gupta. I work for two environment news websites. One is called thethirdpole.net. The other is called indiaclimatedialogue.net. With me on the panel today are two very well-known reporters who cover the environment. Richard Mahapatra, to my right, from Down to Earth, and Stella Paul, who has been writing stories on the environment for quite some time and concentrating on some very interesting aspects of environmental reportage, especially to do with gender. So I'm very glad that we are here. I think we are all hoping that we'll talk as little as possible and you'll talk much more, because this, at least the way I see it, is not supposed to be something one way. It's supposed to be two ways. I think I'll take the moderator's privilege to go last. Stella goes first.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's almost, it's nearly afternoon. I hope everybody's awake, and I wasn't expecting so many people for an environmental panel, but let me say that we are always happy when the number goes up, and the same goes here. As Joydeep said, I have been covering the environment, and what I do is I look at environment and different development issues and connect the dots between the two. And I look at these issues through the eyes of women, who are again from the most marginalized and most vulnerable communities. So to say, I look at climate change from the eyes of the most, what we say, the primitive tribes, like forest tribes, tribes that have been labeled as criminal. Now they're decriminalized, but the social acceptance is yet to be there. I report on climate change from the perspective of garbage pickers, sex workers, victims of sex trafficking, and so on and so forth. Yesterday, I was telling an audience in the evening that for me, every time it's like revisiting my own story, because I come from I live in Hyderabad now, which is in the southern part of India, but I have been kind of an everywhere-ish person, living in different cities of Calcutta, Bombay, Bangalore, Goa, and my family comes from the part of India that borders Bangladesh, Myanmar, and China. And there are lots of all of these issues are very, very, common. And I come from a family of climate refugees. My family lost its land and our home. And I grew up in a village, in a mud hut, actually, where every year we had to build a new hut because there would be flood from Hill River that flew by, and every monsoon I would spend at least 15 days either in the house of a neighbor whose house was built on a higher ground, or in a primary school, elementary government school, and we would live there on the food distributed by the government. I still remember standing in the queue every day to receive a small packet of powdered milk. So that's where I come from. So when I now travel I travel for every single story. and which means I don't do a lot of stories, maybe 2 max, or sometimes 4 if I'm very lucky. Because, and when I travel, for me, it's like every time I'm visiting my own home, my own life. And the people, the women I report on, I feel like they're from my own family. And I live with them. I go to the village, I travel for 1.5 days, sometimes on foot, more often on foot. And again, like I said, it's mine. So that's something I do. Why do I do it, and what do I find? The things that I see are, most of the time, have remained quite the same. The vulnerability, I would say, is one thing. That every time, there are now communities that used to have flood as the biggest problem. In some places, that have now changed. There have been dams that have been built up, so people are now on a dry ground. On the other side, now they have droughts. Now, earlier they didn't have so much of water issues, and now they have to buy water, actually. And I do cover stories not just from India, but from across South Asia. The environmental problems are actually not things that happen to people far, far, far away. That's my feeling. We see the same kind of vulnerability faced by women who migrate from the village and come to the city as well. So if we follow the journey of a woman, as I often do, there is a woman who lived in a village that was hit by successive droughts and had crop failure. So she was either sex trafficked for sex services in the city, or she followed her husband and came to the city as a migrant and started working. So what I notice is that there is dual, the vulnerability actually, just the form changes, but the level, it just goes up. So when a woman from a marginalized community, let's say a forest tribe, lived in the village, maybe all she had that she faced was either a flood or a drought, or crop failure. When they come to the city as migrants, there are new things that she faces, which is like sexual exploitation, forced labor. In 8 out of every 10 women that I talk to have been forced into labor, because it's their husbands who find work first, then the women follow, and mostly they work in the unorganized sectors because they are not educated enough or skilled enough to do other kind of labors. So they work in construction sites where they work as many hours as their husbands do, but they just don't get paid for it. So that's the other vulnerability. Forced labor, sometimes there's slavery as well, because the women are, they have to they're just tied there. The husbands have taken a loan, and it's unpaid, so the woman has to work. And this passes on from the mother to the child as well, especially if it's a girl child. Child labor and also trafficking of women is a very big issue. So these are the women I report about. Why do I do it, and does it really change anything? Well, sometimes impacts do come, things do change. I personally saw a very big change in 2013 when I did a story on women who had been forced into commercial sex work, and they were all women from the farm families. And their husbands had committed suicide after successive crop failures. The media was very, very focused on and did reporting in great detail of how the men took loan from banks and they could not pay it, or from private loan givers, and they couldn't pay back, and the pressure that then ultimately forced them to kill themselves. Those were the stories that were in the media all over, but nobody was reporting on what then happens to the women, like when the husband kills himself, where does the woman go? So that was the story that those are the kind of stories that I do, the stories that don't usually meet the eye. When I was doing this story, I met more than 100 sex workers who, some of them had straight away migrated to the big city, and because they were not qualified enough to do any other job, they didn't have authentication or any papers to show who they are. They don't have any I cards. They ended up working in the sex industry. And a lot of other women were doing highway sex. They were working in the small eateries that mushroom near the highway, and they wash plates during the day, and by evening, then they have to, provide sex service to their clients. And once the story came out, I think I received quite a few emails. There were emails from, thanks to social media, a great deal, and I started receiving emails that, how can I help, and who are these people? And as of today, at least 15 of those women have found jobs. They have been rehabilitated, and some of them are employed with an NGO there, and some have been found jobs in solar equipment manufacturing factories. So these are sporadic and changes, but these are the changes that keep me going at the end of the day. Like most other journalists and my peers would probably bet that there isn't a lot of money, but then journalism is not all about, neither is environmental journalism the least, all about money or fame, but it's that something can change. Doesn't matter how slow the speed is, but it does change, and then I can be a small instrument in that. I'll end with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Stella. Maybe I'll come back to you, or maybe hopefully somebody from the audience will come back later after the panelists have spoken. Richard, over to you.
Okay. I am Richard. I work for this magazine. You may not be knowing it, Down to Earth. It's the magazine focuses on environment and development, but by character we report everything, starting from crime to elections to everything, but we bring in the environment and development aspect into it. So we are a fortnightly. I must tell you, when you talk about climate change, every day we enter our office hoping what to write for the next fortnight on environment. It's a 60 pages magazine. It has a very hectic and dynamic website. Then it comes out with publication. Still, every day we have some doubt, what to do next. Whether the magazine will be closed down. And I must tell you, this year we are celebrating our 25 years. So what does it feel to report on environment in a changing climate? Sometimes it's very, frustrating, in the sense that you enter a news meeting and things come up that sometimes you don't like. You get tired. I have been working for this magazine since 1997. And it's close to 20 years. I'll just demonstrate you something interesting. Just look at, this is June. The drought was so severe in India that we had to do a special issue giving 25 pages. And the headline was Drought, but why? And by July, we are doing a cover story, again a special cover story, on flood. And Egypt, in between, nothing happened. We had to again do a special coverage on clouds. But in all these three cover story, if you look at it from April to September, means August, it's all about weather and changing weather and climate. And what do we found? Let me just explain how things are happening. Say, for example, in India, it's still not out of it. It was a very severe drought. It impacted 300 million people in India. And to put it in perspective, what is uniqueness about drought this year, which impacted both the rural and the urban areas. We actually never saw a situation where many big cities in India would declare water emergency due to drought. So this is the change happening. Drought suddenly became classless in India. Now, by that time we were reporting drought, and the drought was happening in places like Kerala, suppose that it's an southern Indian state, with an average rainfall of 3,000 mm, was having drought. And similarly, most of the drought-prone areas that we traveled this year, it's impacted, the rainfall was not less than 750 mm. And we hardly use 15% of the rain in total. So in fact, the drought has suddenly become, it's very immune to your rainfall. It's something else. Similarly, flood. Northeastern state of Assam, we reported it for drought in May. But the state was already under flood in April. So when we finally got to do this cover story, it was like 20 states were facing flood. And this time the flood was also new. It started in April before the monsoon arrived. And it continued, even now also it continues. Then the question was, is it heavy rainfall? It's actually above normal rainfall? No. Most of the states that are under flood now, severe flood, are in fact rain deficit even now. So what happened? You can go through this, you will feel that the nature of flood has also changed, as I told you about the drought. Drought is no more, drought is secular of rainfall. Flood is also secular of rainfall. Rather, what we saw that each and every spell of flood this year was preceded by an extreme weather event. So it rained for 150, 250, 300 mm of rain in 24 hours, then the flood. And we found that it's sometimes places, and when I say places, it's not one place, two places, or sporadic. You can say that at least in 50% of the weather monitoring stations in India, we had extreme weather events. And overnight, the rainfall was sometimes 700 to 800 times more than the normal rainfall. So the question comes, when you report this, we are an environment magazine. We might have a bit better perspective into all these things. But what the point I'm changing you, just to giving you a sense of the newsroom, and I repeat that I have been a part of Down to Earth newsroom since 1997. And Down to Earth being an environment magazine, it's a barometer to actually gauge how things are changing. It was not that unusual, the newsroom meeting. Yes, monsoon comes, there will be a reporter who will chase the monsoon, but it was not that kind of things. Floods we have been reporting. And in fact, floods, I think, we have been reporting from a different perspective, how flood has become human-made or human-induced. Similarly, drought also we have reported, saying that it's no more a natural disaster, it's human-made. But these new changes that we see in the newsroom are basically, this changing climate and this unusual behavior. While doing things, we found that a fundamental change is taking place. Your clouds are changing now. What do? Clouds are your basic transport system for your weather. They are changing. And why they are changing? That's again, actually humans are playing a role. We found that after deep research into that, the DNA of cloud has changed. And you can say that any Indian, or for that matter, any daylights, will have a bit of diesel in its DNA. We are so polluted. And in fact, now clouds' DNA has also a bit of aerosols which is contaminated with air pollution, like diesel or other black soot. So it's changing. So the point why I'm telling you, it's a fact. But the big challenge is for us, journalists, is that actually how to take our environmental reporting to the next step. Do we always seasonally report that it's flood, it's drought? Then it's no more a story. Just to give you an example of India, anyway, every year 30 million people get impacted by drought. Some 50 million people anyway face flood. So in that case, it's no more a story. So the question is that how to take that story to the next level. I think whether we work in an environment magazine or in a mainstream newspaper or anywhere else, it's high time that this usual reportage has to go beyond it. Because it's no more, the climate change is no more something, for the IPCC to give a verdict. It has already landed up in our bedroom. And in this, actually, just I want to sum up saying that recently we did a survey from our library. It's not a very scientific survey, but let's look at how headlines are changing since, say, in 1991, when India actually opened up its economy. We saw that before 1991, there were few headlines. At least 20% of the headlines were talking about something serious or future-looking subject. For example, why flood is induced by embankment. Why Nepal and India should actually rethink their agreement on rivers. Those were unusual headlines, but still some journalists were working on that. Now, if you look at it after 1991, when actually journalists are reporting more on environmental subject, but it has become very general. Assam flood, for example, it started in April, nobody reported till in July. And when they reported finally, they said that it's flood. Drought, for example, everybody reported, drought was reported mostly because, I must tell you, in India, we have many religions, but the most important religion is cricket. Because somebody went to the court saying that the one Premier League should not happen because it will consume more water and there is a drought. So actually the media reported drought because it involved the IPL, cricket. And unfortunately, cricket is not a crop or water. So that's how actually media went into. So my point, I believe that we are the kind of journalists who have always gone beyond the obvious headlines. And I think that's what we should do. And in the changing climate, our role, and definitely I can speak on behalf of the magazine and the incredible reporters who work here, and many of you, I know you, and it's actually going to be a top job. And it can't be simple headline. But at the same time, we have the opportunity to create new headlines. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Well, yeah, in some ways it's tougher. In some ways we have it easy, actually, because we at least work for slightly specialized media houses. So we don't have to fight so much for space within our media outlets. In a general news media outlet, those of you who work for them know that it's only 30% of your problem is getting the story. 70% of your problem is getting the story published or broadcast. So what I did today, because this was a session on climate reportage, I thought that from my experience of doing that, I would try to help those reporters to the best possible extent who work for general interest media houses, whether they are newspapers or TV stations, radio stations, or websites, so that they can relate things like climate change to what their audiences see and experience every day. Because we do stories like the kind that Stella was talking about. We publish those stories, and they're excellent stories. However, the bulk of our audience remains urban. So if we cannot relate our stories to the bulk of our audience, then the editors and the gatekeepers are to that extent less likely to use our stories. So what I did was select 6 photographs from the website in which I work. They're not pretty pictures, but let me see if I can put them up. Let me see. Ah, yes. I can see them here. How do I get to... Ah, there it is. Thanks, thanks, thanks. Now, this is something that every reader, television viewer, everybody in Delhi knows. The moment local air pollution is something everybody knows. In this part of the country, increasingly in many other urban centers all over the world. This is not something you have to hit your audience on the head with. This is something they get. Then the question becomes, what's the this or this? Also they get that much of the smog happens due to agricultural residue burning. Well, the rest of it happens largely due to transport, massive amounts of transport, and some industrial. And it's a soup, as you well know. The challenge to the reporter is to take the reportage of this beyond the local pollution and connect it to what is the connection between this and climate. That is what the session was. The connections are there, the connections are being studied, the connections exist in complicated scientific journals. But that is what I wanted to talk about, that reporters working for mass media outlets need to get that connection if they are going to put their story beyond the immediate air pollution story, which will not have an impact. Smog of this kind has been studied. There has been a lot of speculation that to what extent they contribute to cooling, because the sunlight doesn't get through in the winters. And now it has been studied and found that they do, even in terms of cooling, they don't do enough. They actually do more harm than good when it comes to increasing the temperature. The soot particles over here go and lie on the glaciers and the ice fields, and they reduce the reflection. Many of you who do science reporting know these things. All I'm trying to tell you is to use this route to bring climate in, and so that your audience gets it. Otherwise, if you go straight into the climate story, they may not get it. This is the kind of water pollution that everybody gets. And this is just about 70 kilometers upstream of Delhi. The effluents from textile dyeing units. And this is the river that passes through Delhi. Now you put up the story on your website, and every reader gets it. There's no question that they don't get it. The one after this is in Delhi. These are methane bubbles in the Yamuna. And that's the state of the river that passes through this city. This is in Kutsia Ghat, methane bubbles in the Yamuna. And all your readers will get it. Then the question becomes that what's the connection between this, climate, water? What does climate change do to your water supply? I'm not going to go into details because Richard has just explained the two-way problems that climate is creating in terms of water. You either have too much or too little. You have far too much in far too short a time, so you can't handle that. And whatever little you get, this is the state. So get that connection, and you've got your audience. That's all I'm trying to say. Same with solid waste management. I just wanted to point out that it is not just India. So I could have taken this picture on the banks of just about any river or stream in India. I actually took this on the banks of the Bagmati in Kathmandu. So it's the same in Nepal. And I could have taken this on any beach in India or many parts of the world. This is the beach in Karachi. So it's more or less the same situation out there. Solid waste management stories, garbage stories actually get a lot of play in the mass media, because that's something that your audience sees daily on their way to work and on their way home. So then what does local solid waste management have to do with climate? That's the challenge. The way you treat solid waste, whether you incinerate it and add to the problems by halfway house incineration, whether you use sanitary landfills, and what happens to that if they're not properly lined, what happens with the leachate, what happens in terms of the faster degeneration, the faster fermentation of this kind of garbage because the average temperatures go up. These are stories to connect this, the local story to the larger story. I will stop by saying that if it's my experience that if you can connect the local story to the larger story, you get far better response from your audience. I'll stop there for the time being, and I'll be very happy if members of the audience, which I'm very glad to see, includes one of my gurus. If you jump in, please. Over to you.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I guess I just thought I'd throw this in. The challenge is to get the mainstream media interested in climate issues. First, the editors and the gatekeepers interested, and then their readers, who are mainly urban dwellers, as you said. I was wondering if it would be possible to frame the whole question not as an environmental story, but as an economic one, because it hits the wallet, and everyone is interested in that. So being energy efficient, being clean about use of energy, helps save money. And it also helps to clean up the environment and maybe even save the planet. So I wonder if you at Down to Earth and also Stella have used the economic argument in framing this discourse.
I fully agree, and I do, but I'll let Stella and Richard answer for themselves.
No, I actually agree with you that if you look at the example of Down to Earth, and if you, because the CSE conducts lots of media briefing workshop also where people interact, Down to Earth experience, if you tell it, it's the most difficult place to sell an environment story to begin with. It's in existence for 25 years. It has almost reported first generation, second generation, and third generation, so it's difficult. But this economic aspect of late, we see that that's actually making sense to connect these environmental issues to a larger audience. And for example, I'll give you this, when we're doing this drought story, the Prime Minister of India just made a tall promise that he is known for, so that I want to double farmers' income by 2022. That's, I think, desirable situation. But we are looking at how to actually sell an environmental story to the Prime Minister now, because he has made this promise. So in this drought issue, we told, actually from that same drought-impacted places, we looked for positive examples where people are not facing drought, despite being in a drought-prone area. And we looked at their earning, and we found that they have actually more than doubled their income in less than 5 years. And that's a rare acknowledgement from a Prime Minister who is always in public through social media, and but only speak, never listens, or never react to things. And I must tell you, his office actually asked for a copy of the magazine. So my point is, we are talking about the outreach to the general public and how to make a climate change or environmental issues things. It is an economic story on face, but if you look at it, we put that economy saying that if you don't have a good village environment or ecology, your economy is not going to work. So it's ecological poverty which you need to fix to raise the income. So, but I entirely agree that economy, I think, has to be at the center of any debate, because climate change has a class bias. It's going to impact the poorest the most because they don't have that power to absorb it. So this centrality, I think, needs to be elaborated a bit more among ourselves and to understand.
Thank you. I'm really glad that this question came up. For me, coming from where I am and what the kind of stories that I do, there is nothing called climate change, unless you are also talking about the other effects, the consequences of climate change. So for me, livelihood, the loss of livelihood, loss of an income, all the money, these are very, very integral, very central to climate change. And I also love to mention Joydeep. I mean, you just heard him. He was trying to, this is something he always does. He always is telling people to look at climate change from different angles that you can identify with, your audience can identify and spot. And I've been doing that, and for me, because when I go to, you go to a community that is far away, remote, isolated, and you talk about them climate change, they don't understand. There is no climate change. It's always crop failure. It's always flooding of the house. And that means taking money from a private lender or a bank, or not getting an insurance, or signing up for an insurance. It's all about economy. Or leaving their village, coming to the city, looking for a job, feeding their kids, getting underpaid, not getting money. Everything is economy. I think as a journalist, we cannot tell a story of climate change in its honesty and integrity if we are not looking at economy or the money part, because it is completely central. And I will give an example. There was one time when I went to a village in a mountain area in the southern part of India, and the story that I was told that I wanted to see the use of renewable energy out there, and some women in the forest were getting trained into using solar energy. So that's the story I went to see. So when I went there, these people, they are hunters and gatherers. They collect herbs from medicinal plants from the forest, and they sell it to the government forest department. And the government used to pay them a certain amount of money for every kg of the herbs that they sell. And the rate that they received remained the same for past 50 years. It hadn't changed because these people are also very close to the coast, and they do face a periodic cyclone every year. At least 3 to 4 cyclones hit, and the herbs that they then, the process is that you gather them, you bring them home, you dry them, bundle them, sell it to the government. And every time when they were drying them, there would be a rain and cyclone, and half of their stuff would be soggy, wet. So the rate they would get was very low. And then they bought a solar dryer, and now they are not dependent on the sun anymore. They are drying it. I mean, they don't actually have to, spread it on their courtyard and dry it. So they dry it using the solar dryer. They're using renewable energy that way. And now they do not have to sell to the government, because the government policies have not changed in forever. So now they have even found, because thanks to all the wellness diseases, and there were a lot of healthcare industries, manufacturers that are now scouting for herbs. And so they have started looking for a clientele beyond the government, and they're getting much higher price. So for me, the story was not about a renewable energy, solar energy reaching a certain village. That could be the story for a government official to say maybe or do. But for a journalist, the story was that how these people could get better price for all the efforts that they put in using renewable energy, and how they could now afford a better life using renewable energy. That's the story. And if we leave out the money part or economy part, then the story is just incomplete. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Kunda. I always tell other reporters that if your general page editor is giving you grief, go to the business page editor. It's always a good business story. So that always works. Other questions, comments? Yeah.
My question to Richard is, looking at the seriousness of the magazine you edit, natural question comes, like how do you survive? What is the business model of your magazine? Are you, expanding? How do you pay the investigation? How do you pay your reporters who do investigation?
It's not always easy, but yes. Just to tell you, briefly about, I'm not boasting about it, but Down to Earth has written since its late founder Anil Agrawal started, we have written that policy of spending maximum on news gathering. And it's not a very tenable thing to do presently. But Down to Earth has a different way of functioning it. Now the question comes, I'm coming to it. Yes, we do pay. To reporters, we do pay. We have a large network of contributors also besides our reporters. We do pay them as well. But more than that, what we do, having a large number of contributors and spending on people's travel and to actually spending money on their story. Because for doing any story, they have to travel, they have to spend time, they have to look at the linkages. This kind of story actually take time. And when I say it take time, it's not more than 10 days kind of things because you cannot afford it. It's fortnightly. So what we do actually out of this, we always encourage a down-to-earth reporter who is traveling to an area to interact with the local reporters as well, or our contributors. So we converse such a way that the local reporters are actually, they are the best to inform you what's happening. And say our reporter, maybe, and most of the time, it has a perspective of a subject. So they come together and we quickly actually they find the linkages between the local to the national to the global. I'm just giving you an example. Using fluid is very general in this part of the world. Still, close to 60% of rural Indians use fluid. Internal, air pollution is one of the biggest killer in India. But suddenly, if you look at it, the very traditional Indian kitchen is being talked about at global scientific platforms. Being here in Delhi and being access to other people, we suddenly saw that our traditional chulha is being talked about. So what is the link? So usually what we do, we ask our contributors, send a reporter to a traditional chulha, to a kitchen, spend time with the women, and look at it. And then from here, somebody will look at the scientific things. The chulha has the black suits. Now they are saying that black soot is one of the biggest problem. In fact, will contribute massively to climate change and global warming and the resultant climate change. So we do this kind of things. So for us, it's always an interaction between the local, whether it's a subject, national and global, whether it's subject, as well as the people. So the reporters who are working out of it and local reporters who are working. And yes, we might not be a very highly paying organization, but we always budget such a way that we spend maximum, significant part of our budget on traveling and making people to travel actually. Sorry? And that will be a big disclosure, but so let me say it. It's not that actually a rocket science kind of things. Why I said that is that, this is a magazine which doesn't have to struggle much for a market. Our first editorial was saying this magazine is not going to actually, like any other magazine, will work on capturing a major chunk of the market. That's the first principle-wise. And it has been surviving. We have close to 40,000 copies we sell every fortnight. Website, we have around 1 lakh visitors every day, 100,000 visitors, page views. The model why it's interesting is because we also work with Center for Science and Environment, CSE, which is a very, many of you might be knowing. It's a think tank which does research. So what happens? Actually, from there itself, we get our research and knowledge right away. So we maximizing things. Second, in the beginning, I said that, we are a bit not controlled by the market forces, but we have to survive also. So what we do? We not only sell the magazine, we come out, we have actually maximized our capacity to bring out a state of environment report annual. We sell that. We bring out with various books, we sell them. And all this money, nobody takes away. We actually plow it back to reporting. And I say specifically back to reporting only. So that's why we have retained our news gathering budget.
Yes. The last question from the lady here.
Me?
Yeah.
Mike, I'm Namita Nagpal. I just want to suggest, why can't we rephrase the term climate change as our own doing? That brings in how we are contributing in bringing about the climate change. That is, you have shown all the pictures, but people are not noticing it basically because they don't see that this is their own doing, that this is climate change is resulting. Of course, we know all the geographical reasons. I did put it.
Yeah, okay, I'll respond. Yeah, okay, I know we're running out of time. We do stories on, and I would urge you to do more stories on lifestyles and the climate change connection. That's what we're talking about, individual lifestyles and the connection with climate change, whether it worsens the situation or improves the situation. Those are stories worth doing. We do them. I know Down to Earth does them. I know Stella does them. We do them as well. And yes, I would urge you to do them as well.
Mr. Mahapatra, my question is, environment is a vast subject and it's a very complex issue. Can you repeat it? Yeah, environment is a vast subject and it's a complex issue. And there is no quick fix solution to it. So when you go for reporting and you publish a story without any solution, don't you think it's very much theoretical?
Quickly, first, when you do a story, you go out and all this thing, the theory is completely shattered, I think, first. And environment should not be seen in isolation, particularly if in the developing world perspective, the southern global perspective. Environment is a completely economic and, livelihood issue here. The second, solutions, I think solutions are the best thing to happen in the environment journalism or development journalism. As I just gave you the example, when Mr. Modi promised that I want to double, we actually threw up examples saying just listen to these people. But, a problem must be first identified to look for a solutions. Second stage is that once you flag up a problem or a solution, a problem, then you look for a solution. So that's why the problem part always comes first actually, then you do it. But I agree, we should look at solutions. And remember, the solution part is the most fascinating part of our reportage, being an environment journalist.
I'm sorry we are over time. I can see more hands, but we'll have to take it outside because we are already run over time. Okay.
I'm Tenzin from Bhutan. We get reports that with the global warming, the water resources in the Hindu Kush Himalayas are drying up. But then it concerns me because I come from the mountain and where rivers are our economy. But then actually I would like to know from Mr. Gupta, but then we don't get specific and concrete data as to how and to what degree the water sources are being dried up. If you could tell us if you have any data on this.
Okay, we can do a lot of this one-to-one outside, but very briefly, I will tell you that it's not a matter of just drying up. It's a matter of the rainfall and snowfall pattern changing, and a very brief way to describe that is less rainfall or snowfall in the overall period, but heavier rainfall or snowfall on those days, which doesn't help, especially on mountain slopes, because then the water doesn't hold, you get flash floods and it just goes down. So that is a bigger problem than a gradual drying up. That is what's happening. It's an extremely data deficient part of the world. So to the extent to which overall rainfall patterns exist on a monthly basis, on an annual basis, over time, that just about exists. But for the reasons you know and I just explained, it doesn't really help to have a monthly average rainfall if in that month all that rain is falling in one day. So that becomes a problem. And that's a problem that's not being addressed. And I think we should all report on this some more so that scientists address it. Thank you.
I want to thank this panel. We really have some experts up here, and I appreciate it very much. There was a good turnout, so thank you very much.